Thank you and good morning. Thank you for joining us today for this bipartisan roundtable on the use of technology to combat crimes against children. Protecting our children from online exploitation and abuse is one issue which unites all of us, Democrats, Republicans, parents, grandparents, and everyone in between. No matter where we stand on other matters, we all agree kids deserve to grow up safely, and predators who hide behind screens to harm them must be stopped. Today's roundtable is a little different from a typical hearing. First, this event is a collaboration between Ranking Member Brown and myself. I want to thank the Ranking Member and her staff for working with us to make this event a reality. Second, today's conversation will be informal. We will not keep time, and I will not be recognizing members to speak as we typically do with hearings. We will instead hear brief opening remarks from our participants, followed by a demonstration of technology available to law enforcement to combat sex crimes against children. To be clear, due to this being a public event, the presentation will be modified to reflect law enforcement sensitivities and privacy concerns. If any member wants to receive the full briefing with live updates, I encourage you to coordinate accordingly with our witnesses. I hope for this to be an informal but informative conversation between the members of our subcommittee and the subject matter experts with us today, and I hope all of my colleagues feel empowered to ask questions along the way. I'm now pleased to introduce our panelists. First, Stefan Turkheimer, Vice President for Public Policy at RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. RAIN operates the National Sexual Assault Hotline, and Stefan has 18 years of legal experience as prosecutor, employment attorney, and congressional staffer. Second will be Brad Russ, Director, National Criminal Justice Training. NCJTC provides training to the 64 ICAC task forces across the country on the critical technology Brad will demonstrate for us today. Prior to his time at NCJTC, he served in all ranks and divisions of the Portsmouth, New Hampshire Police Department for nearly 25 years before retiring in 2003 as Chief of Police. Brad established the Northern New England ICAC Task Force program and served as one of the first 10 ICAC task force commanders in 1998 when DOJ established the national program. I look forward to our conversation and to learning more about what Congress can do to support our partners who are with us today and in their critical work. And one side note before I hand it over to the ranking member, I had a press conference in South Carolina last Thursday with over a dozen moms who were frustrated by the release of a convicted child sex offender, pedophile, who was released within hours after violating his probation 11 days after being convicted. There was a media blackout of this press conference. And one of the things I see in South Carolina is a massive increase in sex trafficking, child sexual abuse, et cetera, over 400% increase over the last couple of years. When this media blackout happened, there was a child who saw a picture that I held of this convicted pedophile on Instagram. This child came forward the same day and courageously filed a police report despite all efforts to silence moms and children who should have heard that press conference. I don't know how many children would have come forward if that press conference had been heard. So God bless that child and that child's family. So before we hear from Stefan and Brad, I want to turn to Ranking Member Brown for any opening remarks she would wish to make.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you to our speakers for coming in today to discuss and demonstrate how your technology is fighting against child sexual abuse materials on the internet. These horrifying photos, videos, and records, often referred to as CSAM, have dramatically increased as technology and the internet has made it easier to share them faster and with more people. Social media made things worse, helping predators to search for and contact new victims, and now we are seeing predators use artificial intelligence tools to alter images, including by undressing minors. While technology can make it easier for perpetrators to create and distribute CSAM, it can also make it easier for law enforcement to identify, catch, and prosecute those predators. I was pleased to be able to join and champion Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office community project funding request to equip their office with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force technology. It is important that we stay on the cutting edge of how to prevent the spread of these materials and stop predators from preying on victims. I look forward to hearing how our panelists are using technology to stop criminals, protecting the most vulnerable among us. Thank you again for participating in our roundtable today.
All right, thank you. And I would like to start with you, Mr. Russ. I believe you have a demonstration you were going to be showing us this morning?
It's
Or
Mr.
Mr. Turkheimer, okay. So,
No, thank you so much, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Stephen Turkheimer. I serve as the Vice President of Public Policy for RAIN. We're the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization. For over 30 years, RAIN has operated the National Sexual Assault Hotline and provided direct support to millions of survivors while simultaneously advocating for policies that hold offenders accountable and also creating programs to protect children and adults from harm. On RAIN's hotline, we hear from people every day. We hear from kids every day who have not been able to reach safety. What we hear is heartbreaking. Kids are being failed by the adults in their lives who neither recognize nor have the resources to stop ongoing abuse. They are in immediate crisis. They may never get to the reporting stage, but they have reached RAIN. Nearly 500,000 Americans reached out to the hotline last year. We see the trends in sexual abuse but on the hotline before we see it in justice statistics. And since the pandemic began, not only have the number of people reaching out increased, but calls from children have exploded. They became the majority of hotline calls in 2020, and now 68% of the calls to the hotline are about child sexual abuse. Many of the children who are reaching out are not safe. Their abuse hasn't ended. They can't get help. They need someone to help them. They need you to help them. I'm here today because we face an urgent crisis at the intersection of technology and child safety. The proliferation of child sexual abuse occurring within technology platforms has reached unprecedented levels, and without immediate action, the technology designed to connect us is weaponized against us, and it's used to harm our most vulnerable. And the scale of the problem is staggering. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received over 32 million reports of suspected child sexual abuse materials in 2023, and that number will increase exponentially year after year. These numbers only tell part of the story, though, because behind each report is a real child experiencing harm, often ongoing. These images and videos document actual crimes against children, and their continued circulation re-victimizes survivors every single day. In confronting perpetrator strategies in 2026 with the law enforcement abilities of the 1980s is incongruent with justice. We need to stop addressing the crime as it was 30 years ago. At that time, the internet was in its infancy, predators were local, AI didn't exist. The technology has evolved to create new dynamics and interaction points for predators who talk to each other in chat rooms and through encrypted messages. They teach each other how to groom children and actively recruit others to offend. They weaponize the technology that is completely necessary and ingrained into our daily lives. Multiple peer-reviewed articles have come out referring to today's online landscape as a hunting ground for victims. Predators no longer have to meet children in a park or be in close proximity. Instead, those criminals are entering children's bedrooms through their computers and phones, and the predators are doing that from anywhere. It used to take time to find a child, groom a child, and make confined CSAM. Now, with the help of AI and chatbots, predators do all of this with the push of a button. The circles of abuse are growing larger and larger. Perpetrators now have greater and non-singular motivations for participating in abuse. There exists now incredible financial incentives to harm children, from exploiting children for money to extorting a child for nude images, which can then be sold to pedophiles. These networks are no longer a few people in an encrypted chat, but are sophisticated networks that launder money and perpetuate the abuse of children. AI is now allowing children and adults to be exploited by creating nude and sexual images and then threatening to disseminate them if the victims don't provide something of value, either money or real CSAM. The intervention landscape, that Brad will talk about, is bleak. When you hear about a cyber threat or a flag on a dark network that gives rise to a report, there's an assumption that those tips are going to be investigated and that if there are children in danger, from that offender, they will be made safe. That is not the case. Law enforcement needs resources to keep pace. As CSAM reports have surged, and investigators tasked with reviewing this material and rescuing victims remain chronically understaffed and under-resourced. We need increased funding for ICAC task forces, enhanced training programs, and mental health support for the professionals who work these cases. These investigators face some of the most traumatic content imaginable, and we owe them the tools and support necessary to do this critical work. We need to take on the criminal organizations that exist today. We need to prioritize investigations of these networks and shut down the financial incentives for them to exist and expand. We need to address the perpetrators who live outside the US but infiltrate our homes and through the internet. We must prevent technology from being developed and deployed in these harmful ways. We have to give investigators the tools to investigate crimes that are using the fiber networks instead of our highways. At the same time, technology companies must do more. While some platforms have implemented detection and reporting systems, the response across the industry remains inconsistent and inadequate. Encrypted platforms have become safe havens for offenders, and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence are being exploited to generate synthetic CSAM and to groom children. We need industry-wide standards that prioritize child safety without exception. Prioritization needs to be shifted away from merely reporting the problem, which has made significant progress with public technology, and start focusing on prevention and accountability. But survivors must remain at the center of our solutions. The children depicted in this material grow up carrying the knowledge that images of their abuse exist in perpetuity online. RAIN works with survivors who describe the ongoing trauma of knowing that their abuse is being viewed and shared. Any legislative or technological solution must include robust victim notification systems and the legal right to pursue removal and accountability. Those solutions before us require balancing innovation with protection, privacy with safety. It's not an easy balance. It is a necessary one. We cannot allow the promise of technology to be overshadowed by its abuse. Children deserve to grow up in a digital world that protects them rather than exploits them. And we stand ready to work with y'all and with technology companies, with law enforcement, with survivors to turn the tide on this crisis. But the time of incremental change has passed. We need comprehensive, enforceable standards that make child safety non-negotiable. Thank you for your leadership on this critical issue, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Turkheimer. Now, Mr. Russ.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you for the introduction earlier. As you said, my background has been in law enforcement since 1978. I was in charge of our juvenile division and our child abuse unit in the early 80s, before the internet, before cell phones. And as Stefan just remarked, you know, it was a much more difficult challenge for offenders back when I was investigating these cases than it is today. We saw it growing in my own department. At the time, I was in charge of our detective division, and as you mentioned, applied to be one of the first 10 internet crimes against children, commonly referred to as ICAC task forces. Because it was a brand new program, I reached out to the Attorney General in Vermont and the state police in Maine, and we formed a tri-state or Northern New England task force. So I had responsibility for all 3 states. But now the program has grown from 10 in 1998 to 61 federally funded sites. But what's also important to understand is that they can't do this work alone, but the federal funding only pertains to the task forces. So every state asks other law enforcement agencies, prosecutors' offices to assist, and they're called affiliates. However, those affiliates do this because they're committed to solving these problems, but they get no support other than the ability to attend our training programs. And so it's a huge challenge, as Stefan mentioned. The number of cyber tips last year disseminated to the task forces was 675,000. If you can imagine having investigative leads that you now need to look at every one of those cyber tips to determine if there's actionable information and a victim that you can locate and an offender that you can hold accountable. So it's an overwhelming challenge. And in relative terms, now the task force is still run by the Portsmouth Police Department, where I retired from in 2003 to take responsibility for the training programs for the task forces. But in relative terms, their funding level has not gone up in all of those years. And, you know, I know your time is very valuable. You know, you see these cases just like we do in the news every day. And many of them are very horrific, and I'm going to show you an example of the type of individual that we apprehend in these investigations. But as I said, this program's been around since 1998. It's a national network. It's very effective. The task forces are some of the most committed individuals you can imagine. This is very difficult work. When you think about watching videos of children being raped and tortured and brutalized, the task force members basically turn over at a rate of 25% a year, because this is some of the most difficult work you can do. The hard part is their ability to stay ahead of the threats. You have to imagine the people that we train come in at all different levels of capability. We train, a lot of people don't realize the average law enforcement agency size out of the 18,000 agencies across the country is 15 officers. So many of these departments don't have specialized high-tech crime units. That's why the task force becomes so important, so that you have one agency with jurisdiction over a state. In my case, some of the larger states have more than one task force, like California, Texas, Florida. But these smaller agencies come to us and to the program to be trained, but also to be supported in many other ways in terms of tools and technologies. For example, there are now canines that are used in search warrants to detect electronic media. Not everybody has one of those dogs or can afford one of those dogs. So supporting the task force network as it grows year after year, we now have 5,787 affiliated agencies we have responsibility for. You have to remember, when I first started being responsible for the training in 2003, there were 30 task forces. So now we have 5,700, and it's become a huge challenge. But I want to show you some of the ways we're using technology to leverage you know, our effectiveness here to be more effective in this area. But first, I just wanted to mention, you know, task forces not only
One second. Well, I want to switch out your mic. It's echoing a little bit. Can we do that
Oh,
real
sure, sure. Thank you. Just a different one.
Well, they did earlier, and it
Thanks. I hope this is, oh yeah, that's better. Thanks. I'm sorry for that earlier. You know, one of the things you need to recognize is people come forward to task forces from the public, right? It could be somebody in a school, a parent. There are a lot of cases that they get asked to handle just from their own jurisdiction. Then you get cases that are forwarded to them by, say, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or by internet service providers. And so what I'm here to talk about is the right side of the screen, which is the self-initiated cases. Because they're so overwhelmed by what they get, as I mentioned earlier, 675,000 referrals just from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they have a difficult time working what we call proactive or self-initiated cases, which is what I'm going to show you in a minute. And those are the ones where you're going after some of the worst offenders. And so one thing I wanted to mention briefly, as someone who's worked child abuse now for 40 years, this problem has been pervasive for hundreds and hundreds of years, which is that 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 males sexually assaulted in this country before their 18th birthday. Only 1 in 10 come forward. And I'm here to talk about these hidden victims who are out there languishing, you know, the situation that they have to deal with. I can't tell you how many victims I've worked with that came forward 10, 20, even longer, years later, and what their life has been like and how difficult it's been for them. And so what we try to emphasize in our training programs is not only holding offenders accountable, but finding these victims. And these offenders are individuals who, you know, it's amazing to me the number of people that I've arrested myself who are married with children, have good jobs, and there's a lot of psychology around this that I won't get into, but the area that I'm going to focus on with the time we have available is child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. The consumption of that, when you talk to these offenders, when they're confessing to these crimes, they talk about a downward spiral where they started oftentimes with adult pornography, moved to child pornography, and started watching more and more offensive, horrific material. And what people don't understand is that the possession of it, the transmission of it, the people who produce it, all of those are felony offenses. And so people who've been arrested simply for possessing child pornography or child sexual abuse material, oftentimes people think of it in terms of, well, these are just picture cases. They're just looking, what harm are they doing? They're just looking at this of material of children being molested. Obviously, there's great harm to those victims whose images and those videos persist and are throughout the internet. But what this study showed, and there have been others that have replicated it, is that people who possess child sexual abuse material traded on the internet, the majority of them are hands-on offenders. They are actively molesting children. And they, on average, in this study, have over 13 victims each. But when you first encounter them, they're not going to admit to that, right? All the people I've investigated, whether it was a homicide, a robbery, any kind of crime, they lie, deny, and minimize. Every offender does that when they're in trouble. And so when you think about how, initially these offenders, before they went through this program at a federal prison system, they were only 26% of them were admitting to being hands-on offenders, and they admitted to just under 2 victims per offender. But when they went through the program and actually confessed to all of their crimes as part of this treatment program, it turned out that 85% of them were hands-on offenders, and they had over 13 victims apiece. And so the challenge is, how do we find these individuals and how do we rescue these children? The other challenge that I had as a task force commander was, back in my day, we were working what were called traveler cases a lot. So we'd pose as an underage child, somebody would communicate with us in a chat room, would want to meet us for the purposes of sex, knowing we were underage. Those are still cases the task force works, and they're very good cases. However, most of those offenders come from outside of your jurisdiction. So I was frequently being asked by police chiefs and sheriffs, how do we localize this situation? So the task force, in cooperation with our program, the National Center for Criminal Justice Training, the National Criminal Justice Training Center, worked collaboratively with the FBI, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, many other groups, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst does a lot of our software development, the University of New Hampshire Crimes Against Children Research Center. All of us work together to develop a lot of these tools and these systems that we use today. So this one is called ICAC COPS. It is a law enforcement sensitive system. I have to sanitize this presentation. That's why some of this information is blurred. But the beauty of this system is that as an investigator, I can sit down at my desk. What you're looking at here is the screen I captured yesterday for Portsmouth, for New Hampshire, because the task force is for all of New Hampshire, right? So what I'm looking at here are people who are actively trading child sexual abuse material, and I can localize where they are through the technology that we've developed. So for example, I can show you across the country here, just in 1 week, there are almost 21,000 people who are committing felony offenses. Each image is a felony. They're often trading tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of files. And these individuals, as I said, even if half of them are actively molesting children, and say it's 10 instead of 13 on average, you're talking, about 100,000 victims here just in 1 week. And so I grabbed the states for the members. This is just 1 week in South Carolina. Every one of those pins represents somebody who's actively trading child sex.
How does South Carolina rank among other states?
They're all pretty, when we look at the number of offenses, a lot of it is population driven. Like when you saw.
We have a higher rate of incidences compared to other states based on population.
I don't think so. I think that, it's pretty even across the country. Because the problem is about to mention that a lot of law enforcement agencies don't have the tools and the technology and the training to identify these individuals and pursue these cases. So as an investigator, for example, in South Carolina, I could look at the map, and then you can sort it as a spreadsheet, and I can look at these offenders in terms of the number of files that they're trading, the number of networks that they're trading them on, the severity. We've categorized, there's over 5 million images in our library, and they're categorized on the basis of severity on a scale of 1 to 9. So the worst offenders are viewing pornography that often involves infants and toddlers being raped and
So I have I'm going to interject here.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions because I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But This is deeply disturbing. But so you say network, define network, like how are they trading?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to explain.
Is it on the dark web? Is it an app? Is it software that they use to,
It's something I'd have to tell you
Okay.
about in a closed session. I'm
Gotcha.
sorry, because we just, but yes,
okay, and then on a scale of, you said 1 to 10 or 1 to 9 on the severity?
yes.
Where would you put someone who's caught with 1,900 images of toddlers as young as 3 being raped by animals? On a scale of 1 to 9, where's that one?
That's a 9.
That's a 9. I'm gonna share a picture. This guy's name is Donald Gresh, ICAC in South Carolina. Caught this guy with 1,900 images of toddlers as young as 3 being raped by animals. He was facing 60 years
Right.
in jail. Do you want to guess, Mr. Russ, how much time he served? 1 day.
Wow.
1 day. And the injustices I see is why I'm deeply passionate about this issue. This is another one. This is Travis Reed Gay. This is a convicted pedophile, I guess, that was convicted in November, violated his terms of his probation 11 days later. Magistrate judge, probably without a law degree, let him out a few hours later. And there was a media blackout, and there was a child that came forward because he followed, allegedly, that child at a park about a week and a half ago, but was facing 70 years, probation.
Wow.
And so I see all the work that you're doing with ICAC, all these ICAC officers. I've met them. They, as you know, you've missed holidays with your family,
Right.
soccer games for your kids. You pour yourselves into these investigations, and then in a state like South Carolina, we don't prosecute. In fact, my attorney general had no court trials for any pedophiles in over a course of 3 years in the last 5 or 6. None.
I can tell you the task forces are very aggressive, and as you say, they work night and day, holidays, weekends. It's a capacity issue. They don't have the resources they don't have enough investigators.
So they need more federal resources to be able to do,
Right.
to have the tools necessary. I agree with you 100% on that. But when they do the work, like with Donald Gresh,
Right.
like with Travis Reed Gay,
Yeah.
it sure would be nice if they went to jail for being a pedophile and abusing kids. This Travis Reed Gay guy, the image that they caught with him was with an infant, that he had an image of an infant allegedly being sexually assaulted.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know if where they identified those 2 individuals using the technology that I'm showing you, because, it is very effective. The hard part is, as I said earlier, they're so overwhelmed with other cases and there's so few investigators. They're unable to do the type of investigation I'm showing you now, because, so now I sit down, I look at this in South Carolina, 252 offenders in just 30 days. If I take the person that's trading the most files in this situation, it's over 75,000. That's just what we know about. We often go into those homes with search warrants, and there's many more that we don't know about, which very much interests us, because then we're going to look for victims that are being abused in, say, in their house or where we see that individual. But those category 8s and 9s I talked about, the worst cases that you just mentioned, that's this purple wedge. So this individual, top offender, not under investigation right now, by the way, has over 14,000 of the worst files. And
One person has over 14,000.
those are the worst files. He has over 75,000 files.
This one person has over 75,000 files.
Right now.
Are they in jail?
No, they haven't even been investigated yet.
That's devastating.
And, there are many reasons for it, but none of them are related to the task force's commitment to do this or their willingness to do
There are
this.
just too many people ahead of them, right?
There's
Too many offenders.
There's also some technology challenges I can't quite disclose here, but there are reasons.
I would like to
not
discuss
because-
those with you
Yeah.
off the record to see what I can do to make and help South Carolina's officers and ICAC and every law enforcement who has to have PTSD investigating these horrific abuses and assist them.
Right. And don't get me wrong, they are investigating some of the individuals. I just grabbed this person that is not under investigation right now as an example. Because one of the files, and I know that description is hard to read, and I'm going to give you a copy of the PowerPoint, but in this particular video called the Falco series, it's a 3 to 5-year-old girl who is bound and is forced to watch 2 adults having sex, and then she's forced to engage in sex acts, and she's crying throughout this entire video, and towards the end of the video, they blindfold her, they bind her hands. I mean, these are the worst kinds of abuses imaginable, and these offenders are fueled by watching this material, and then they want to trade it with other individuals and get more material.
Do you have any thoughts on, like, how do you get there? Like, where does this start? Does this start with your run-of-the-mill pornography that you can get online? Does it start if you were, maybe these people are abused as children?
Right.
Like, how do you get to that point where that is what you're doing? I'm so disturbed. It's horrifying. And then you
Yeah.
can't identify the kid, probably. You
Right.
pray that child is still alive. Who knows?
And that you're right. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but
Yeah.
there are, you know, I've seen many presentations around, it's a lot of those things. They were exposed to violence themselves. They were juvenile delinquents. They were child abuse victims. They become fixated on children, and they become fixated on this material, and they watch it over and over again. It's very concerning to me as a parent and a grandparent now, how much of this material is available to children, you know,
And that's
readily.
before you get to AI that can make some of it out of thin
Right,
air.
and now with AI where it's also produced. But so this individual, you know, is somebody that I would want to target, right? Category 9 files, lots of
If you had the
files.
resources.
If I had the resources. And that's why I wanted to show this map. The red pins are, in just 1 month, the red pins are all the people not under investigation. The blue pins are the people who are under investigation right now. 261 versus 2 under investigation, right? So when it's nationally, what we're.
Can I see where the two are?
I can't zoom in quite close enough. They're north and south of, I think, Atlanta, but Columbia.
Well, I see one in Columbia.
Yeah.
I don't see the second one.
I'm sorry, I would have to zoom in on that, and I can't with this,
Let's
but.
go to Ohio, because Ms. Brown, I just
Yeah.
on the next slide.
And I actually created a map for all the members of the committee, but because it's the same everywhere. Nationally, the worst offenders, less than 1% are under investigation. In Ohio, I think, you know, much larger population, I think close to 12 million versus 5 million, right? So that's why there's more of them. But over 1,000 in just 30 days. Same thing, I picked the top offender, not under investigation. Thousands, oh, it's not, there we go. Over 12,000 category 8 and 9 files, equally offensive material involving infants and children. And, you know, same thing, out of 1,159 identified potential targets, investigative leads, 26 actively under investigation. Once again, I want to emphasize, this is not the task force's fault. This is not something they're unwilling to do. They are so committed to going after these individuals. What they tell me is that they're drowning right now. They can't do this kind of work because they don't have the resources and haven't had them for many years. Arizona, same thing, right? 18 out of 1342. California, obviously much bigger population, over 10, almost 11,000 cases in 1 month, 46 people. Colorado, 15 out of 3,200. Florida, 34 out of 3,200. Missouri, 11 out of just over 1,000. Virginia, 17 out of almost 8,000. And so I just wanted to show you, you know, nationally, it's the same thing. The reason some of the country doesn't have a lot of pins is all population-based, pretty much. But in just 30 days, we just looked at the month of December. Out of 71,000 investigative leads, only 500 were being actively investigated. And once again, when you think about this 71,000, if half of them are molesting children, and that's being conservative, and they have 10 victims, which is being conservative, you think of the damage. And I wanted to show you, you know, you showed the picture of those two individuals. This is a much older case, but I like to show it because it just gives you a sense of why this is so important to go after these individuals.
54-year-old Wayne Bliley a respiratory therapist at the convalescent center at Children's Hospital the past 10 years, pleading not guilty to child molestation, not guilty to possession and distribution of child pornography. That was the plea in court. On the phone while in New York as his home in Santee was being searched earlier this month, he had a different story.
The defendant began confessing to countless acts of child molest.
She says Bliley admitted victimizing half the children in his care dating back to 1996.
He averaged about 2 kids a week, and he specifically chose children who were the most brain damaged, most comatose, most nonverbal, the children who could never say anything about it.
26 years at Children's. Bliley moved to the convalescent center a decade ago. It is a 59-bed facility.
At one point, one of the agents who interviewed him said, "How many kids are we talking about?" And the defendant, who was in New York at the time looking out at the snow, looked out at the snow and said, "How many snowflakes are there out there?"
2 computers and a hard drive were taken from Bliley's house, perhaps 100,000 images and videos of child pornography, many being shared over the internet. Judge David Samowski was asked for continuation of $3 million bail. Not enough.
Going to raise the bail to $5 million.
The investigation is far from over.
Parents are being interviewed, children are being forensically examined, vetting is being tested. We know that there are more victims out there.
On the charges currently filed, Bliley faces 62 years to life if convicted.
So one of the things I wanted to mention is if it wasn't for this technology, it's unlikely this individual would have been apprehended, certainly not as early on as he was. But here's a person that goes into a hospital, a hospice ward, where children are heavily sedated. Most of them are dying. Many of the children he molested had passed away before his trial. So he knew he could target them. They were so heavily sedated, they didn't even know what was happening to them. And he was filming what he was doing with his own cell phone camera. And then he started to distribute that material. So this technology, this training that's so critical to the task forces to find individuals like that is something that desperately needs to be expanded. We need to have the resources, not only in terms of the number of investigators and prosecutors who can work in this area, but also the training and the tools that they need. Because when individuals come into one of these units as an ICAC task force member, they have to go through multiple training programs over a period of time to gain the skills and acquire the tools and be able to testify in court. And that takes time. And because this material is very difficult to deal with on a regular basis, we actually have, mental health services provided to these individuals. After a couple years, they want to rotate out. So it's an ongoing need, as I mentioned earlier. And, the other problem, these problems were identified actually in a report to Congress that is mandated under the PROTECT Act. The one that was most recently delivered to Congress emphasized everything that I'm saying. There's a lack of personnel, trained personnel. They need hardware and software. They need the equipment necessary to crack cell phones and be able to access information. And most of all, they need a lot of training. And as I mentioned earlier, many of these smaller agencies rely on this training. They don't have their own cyber units. They don't have the ability to do this on their own. So a national program is critically important so that you are training everybody to the same standard. You have them operating. They all sign memorandums of agreement that they're going to operate under certain investigative guidelines so we don't compromise any of these tools and the technology that's being used. And, when I think about how much the task force has grown, as I mentioned, from 10 when I first started to, over 6,000 affiliated agencies. When I think about the complexity of these cases, I've just shown you one area of this CSAM file sharing. But when I think about all the other areas that are being used, whether we're talking about AI and those images that are being generated, there needs to be a continued investment in this program, but it's remained flat. It was appropriated in 2008 at authorized in 2008 at $60 million. The funding has remained relatively the same since 2008 to the task forces at just over $30 million.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And so, even if you doubled the trade, even if you hit the authorized level, you would start to make a dent in this problem, but it certainly wouldn't solve the problem.
How much money needs to be, how many resources?
Yeah, I'm not here representing the task force, by the way. I'm here as the director of the National Criminal Justice Training Center. I don't know what they would say to you on that, but I do know from being with them on a regular basis, including at a meeting that was held in December, they would welcome anything that Congress could do to help enhance this program.
And I have to leave here in a little bit, and Congressman Boebert's going to take my seat when I do. So I'm going to, one more thing, and then, we can go around with some questions. But I wanted to say before I do take off, I want to thank you both, Mr. Russ. This has been very eye-opening. I would love to get those slides and also work with you and figure out how we can help South Carolina, ICAC, get the resources that they need, nationwide, obviously, as well. And, but Mr. Turkheimer, what really touched me in your comments was talking about, children are traumatized, but then they're re-traumatized at the idea that they've been filmed and those videos or images have been traded, sold, passed on, and that kind of trauma is lifelong, starting with the child. I am a survivor of voyeurism, and just over 2 years ago, I found out that I was a survivor of voyeurism. I didn't know because I was filmed without my knowledge, permission, or consent, and today, as an elected official, no one has been arrested. And so if I see this in my state and how I've been treated, I can only imagine how children who don't have a voice have been treated. And the idea that someone would, have videos of me, be trading them on the dark web, wherever, is terrifying. And I just, for children that have to go through this, I really dramatically, as much as I can, support what we can do to get resources too for the forensic interviews for these children. There's some really, there's been a lot of great progress on how we communicate with children, and I've seen that in the state of South Carolina. But I did want to ask before I depart, but when Mr. Turkheimer, when you're looking at the most important survivor-centered consideration that Congress should keep in mind as it debates technology and online safety legislation, what comes to mind?
Oh, man, that's such a good question. Thank you for it. I think that quite frequently when you're talking about what the plan is going to be, the voices at the table are often tech companies and not survivors. And so if you think about what these crimes are, and they are crimes, they're really a loss of autonomy, a loss of agency. It's a removal of consent and a removal of that survivor's ability to dictate what happens with their own body. And so what's so important when you're coming up with a system to try to fix that is to have that survivor or survivors in general at the table and making those decisions, because the whole goal in recovery is to give that agency back, to give that control back to them. And so when decisions are being made that are in their best interests but do not involve them, it's just another situation where they've lost control over their own body.
Well, in the case that I'm involved with, and I'm breaking a gag right now by talking about it, I just don't quite care, but the court forced a victim to be recorded and videotaped in front of the man that filmed her being allegedly assaulted. In her deposition, having a camera there in her face and allowing the abuser to be in the room while she's being deposed as they tear her apart is so traumatic. And I'm going to have to go through that at some point in my own life. And I'm just absolutely like, hell no, absolutely not happening. But the idea that, you can be re-traumatized that way. One last question too, what can tech companies do? So I just had something pulled down that Grok had done last week. That was sexual in nature, but we know that, they're taking real images of children, deep fakes of children. What can be done? What responsibility, I guess, do companies have? And of course, the pedophile has, ultimately it's them who's creating the prompt for the AI. But what can a Meta do or an X do to prevent those images from being created? How do we get to that fast?
That's a really good question. And the way you phrase it is, what is their responsibility, right? And I would say, well, what is their liability? Because without any liability, they don't have an economic incentive to prioritize safety. They'll just prioritize growth, right? The growth team will always win over the safety team in internal discussions. And so I think when you're thinking about how to get Meta, how to get Grok to think about children's safety, I think they just have to have an economic incentive to do so. And
Is there an economic incentive now?
no, not really.
What would that look like?
It could look like a system where survivors have some means of like through the Take It Down Act, which is not, the civil actions of that have not been put into effect yet. But through actions like that, where tech companies would have some responsibility, where if they did not remove an image, they did not prevent an image from being created, would have some sort of financial penalty for not doing so. So we can create a tech accountability structure through government oversight that would give tech companies an incentive to prioritize children's safety. And it's possible, but they just don't have one now. So their responsibility morally is going to be secondary to their economic interest. So we just have to make them line up, and they're not right now.
Thank you.
So one of the things I wanted to ask both of you is dovetailing into the artificial intelligence and how it's making it easier for perpetrators to create CSAM. Can you share some ideas or thoughts on how law enforcement could safely and responsibly use AI to combat this?
Yeah, one of the challenges, for the law enforcement community is that if it's AI-generated media, unless an individual state has passed laws to prevent this, what task forces are dealing with are situations under the Ashcroft decision where they're being told, well, this is an AI-generated image, so it's not prosecutable. So one of the things that would be a welcome change would be national legislation to help support those cases and those investigations, because the courts are requiring a proof of authenticity. And what's difficult, once again, as I said, the task forces themselves and many of these smaller agencies, it's challenging to try to determine how much of that image or that video was AI generated. Did they just capture somebody's face and then have AI remove all the clothing or create a video that, as was mentioned earlier, a deep fake type of video. So the task forces are really struggling with this right now as well. But go ahead, Stephen.
No, it's a really good point. So if you think about all of the images that, like, let's say, talk about Meta. Meta removed 32 million images last year. Almost all of those were flagged by a program called PhotoDNA, which essentially is a group of what are called hashes, which allow it to recognize photos. But of course, you're limited to whatever photos are already in the hash database. That's the only thing they can search for, right? There are ways and there are theories in which you can use AI to expand that out to find similar photos and remove those and to tag those and maybe get those people investigated. So there are methods to use AI sort of proactively and also to curb some of the abuse. We're a ways from that, but it is certainly a possibility of a way in which AI can be used to limit predation rather than expand it.
Thank you for that. And then another question that I had was for both of you. What are some actions that you all recommend Congress take to better combat CSAM just on the internet in general?
Yeah, the challenge is that they're using technologies and platforms and systems. Not all of them are even in this country. And so I think that laws could be strengthened along the lines of what Stefan was talking about earlier to hold internet service providers more accountable. There are places now that people are storing these images, these CSAM images in the cloud that are completely encrypted. And even the people who own these companies aren't able to access that information. So even if you get a search warrant to try to gain access to that information, it's almost like Bitcoin. Only the owner has the key to that. So if they won't disclose it, it's hard to get it. I remember listening to a presentation by the Australian Federal Police, and they have a company whose name is Hide My Ass. That's the name of the company. And what they do is promote the fact that even if law enforcement comes knocking on our door, we won't be able to help them. So store your material here. So as Stefan said, you've got to de-incentivize the profit motive and hold them more accountable, much like the EU has done in many areas, that it would be great for the United States to follow their lead.
It's a really good question, and I really appreciate it. I think that children, by and large, are not safe on the internet. And there's a lot of things that tech companies could do but have not. There's a bill in the Senate that doesn't exist in the House called the GUARD Act, which would essentially put some actual restrictions on the way in which chatbots interact with children so that they're not continue to be groomed and that sort of thing. When you look at the way AI is being used by offenders to sort of expand their reach, they do it all in the same way, right? And so tech companies can start looking at those patterns and stop allowing those things to occur. When you talk about sort of, Roblox or Roblox, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, allowing direct messages to children that are underage, they don't have to do that. This is a gaming platform. They don't need to have DMs from adults to children they don't know. That's a decision that's made. The decision that they're making now is the one that's best for their growth. It's not the one that's best for safety. So there are bills that could be written and that have been written that could change those priorities. But until it does, I don't think that they're going to make those changes.
Thank you both, and I'll just yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. So just staying on the vein of legislation, what are some current regulations and legislation that we have that are making it possible to protect children? Or are there existing laws or regulations that unintentionally make it even easier to target our children?
Yeah, you're better at this.
You can start.
I think the challenges that the law enforcement community is facing is that, there have been improvements in the law, for example, for the retention of records, so that if they go to some of these internet service providers, they can get the information about who the subscriber is, where they're located, and whatever files that they've been sharing, get access to that. But, much of it does exist in areas and platforms. I think you mentioned the dark web earlier, or IRC. They like to congregate with each other, these like-minded individuals that molest children. So they'll create their own rooms to talk about how to evade detection by law enforcement. They'll talk about ways to groom a child. Somebody actually wrote a manual that was being traded for a while on how to effectively groom a child and coerce them into remaining silent and not telling anybody about their molestation. These internet service providers need to take responsibility for what's moving across their platforms and what's happening there. And that's what law enforcement's really hoping for, that there's more accountability.
Thank you. And with this, so we're talking a lot about these online gaming systems, Roblox and such, but also there are encrypted apps like Telegram. And are there ways to see what predators are doing in those chats, those rooms that are created explicitly for the exploitation of children?
That's a really good question, because Roblox and Telegram are linked in ways that people don't sort of think of.
Okay.
Right? Where it's like kids are being taken from Roblox. So Roblox has recently put in some safeguards to try to prevent children from receiving direct messages from people that are not other children, right? So they ask children to supply government IDs, which most of them don't have. And so if they don't have a government ID, they need to supply a selfie video of them in order to play games, which is already an issue, but that's okay. And so, but right now on eBay, there's a bunch of people who have used children to create 9-year-old verified accounts, and they're selling those accounts to people, right? And so what tech has allowed an individual to do is to pretend to be a child online, something they can't do in a park, and then maximize their opportunities to try to reach a child. And if a child thinks they're talking to another child, they may have their guard down, they may be willing to have conversations that they wouldn't have with an adult. And so one of the goals of a person in that, an offender in that position, is to remove the child from the relatively safe space of Roblox and take them to a place like Telegram. Telegram is notorious for refusing to work with law enforcement to try to find out what's going on in those spaces. So, I mean, Brad's probably a better judge of that overall, but in our experience, it's been very difficult to rescue a child who is being victimized on Telegram.
Yes, and how effective are stings that go into place? Are there any that the government and local law enforcement are working with? We see sometimes online videos of private individuals who have made this their mission to create their own stings and then get law enforcement involved. But are those taking place? Can they be increased? Are they in fact effective?
Right. The ones that are performed by citizens, there's many challenges with the evidence that they've collected and how admissible that's going to be. So what we hope is to expand, not only the federal agencies, but most of the cases are made by state and local law enforcement agencies, and they do these sting operations on a regular basis. And I can tell you that it's something they're very committed to, but it's one of those situations, once again, because of the resources, that they'll be able to mount a campaign, in a particular time of year to be able to interdict some of these offenses, and then they'll have to go back to dealing with the flood of cases that is coming in. And one thing I didn't mention earlier that I wanted to is the support for the effective investigation of these cases goes beyond law enforcement. When you think about training prosecutors, but also what typically happens in a case, there are a lot of steps to it. And, I made this slide for a presentation a while ago, but when you think about what happens, right, my goal isn't just to arrest the offender. I'm trying to identify these victims. And if I'm able to identify them, they generally haven't come forward. They're often reticent to disclose the abuse. And so now I'm going to need a well-trained forensic interviewer at a child advocacy center. And that's a whole system that needs continued support as well. Because now I'm able to take that child, depending on their age, it's a very different type of interview, whether they're really young or a teenager, or they were sexually trafficked, whole different types of interviews. We train people in that area as well. But, now that's going to take weeks, if not months, to get the full disclosure of all of the information. And now I need the systems to support that victim. Maybe there's non-offending family members as well, but also you're trying to figure out from that victim, do they know of other victims? And it's taking weeks to go through all the electronic media, and you've got to support these forensic interviewers who are watching all this horrific material. And then on top of that, when you think about all the phases of a case, so the depositions that take place, the attempts to exclude the evidence prior to a trial, when we look at all of these steps, and then I shouldn't forget the medical community. You need to corroborate these children's statements with physical evidence. So, you need a competent person doing the medical exam and capturing that information. And then they need mental health services and support. So it's like a whole ecosystem here that needs the support under whatever Congress can do for child advocacy centers, for prosecutors, for mental health people that all work with these victims, because now I don't want to re-traumatize them. I don't want to subject them to multiple interviews. I want them to be supported. And when we looked at this, an average case takes 1 year to 2 years to go through the whole process. So now if I'm only one of 2 or 3 investigators, how many of these can I handle in a year? I mean, I showed earlier these maps, and you might be wondering, well, why are so few of them under investigation? It's a capacity problem. We don't have the people, we don't have the resources to support this entire system.
So, go ahead, Mr. Turkheimer.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I think there's a lot of frustration in this system where they don't see consequences for perpetrators, and there's a lot of sort of acting out beyond that. I do think that there's a couple issues, which is like I think the survivor should always be centered in these situations, and a lot of times in some of the situations you were talking about, sort of these extrajudicial situations, they're not really thinking about the survivors and the other possible victims, which is my only caveat on that issue.
Yes, when I would imagine there would be a lot of trauma and mental health issues that follow from even the investigators and those who are seeing these images and going through. So I can only imagine even the impacts and effects that are taking place on those who are involved, as few as they may be. So we know that there are gaps that exist in law enforcement, personnel being one of the issues, and resources that allow these online predators to exploit minors. How else could we better close those gaps? How can we motivate and entice folks to come into this arena and help battle this?
One of the big things that I talk about a lot with parents is hardening the target. You know, that these offenders, people that, you know, I've arrested even before the internet, they will spend weeks, if not months, grooming a victim, right? So if you're on a Roblox gaming site or any other way you're able to access this child, these offenders won't bring up the topic of sex in the first conversation. Mm-hmm. They will listen to them, like I said, for weeks, if not months, about their problems. Your parents are getting a divorce, or somebody is bullying them, or they've got all kinds of different issues that they're contending with. They will become their best friend first, and somebody that they trust, before they start to introduce this topic of getting together. And so, you know, what we talk to parents a lot about is how you have to be very aware of what your children are doing and what they have access to. A lot of parents don't know about the parental controls on some of these gaming systems. You know, they give their kids a headset or a VR set, and now they have no idea that for a long period of time they've been talking to individuals. And we need kids to come forward. When I think about sextortion cases, the number of kids who've committed suicide in this country because they were too afraid to come forward and tell a parent that, yes, I made a bad decision. I took some of my clothes off. I sent it to somebody that I thought was my friend. Now it's a criminal enterprise that's extorting money from them. And they feel like their life is over because these individuals say, I'm going to post this on Facebook. I'm going to send it to all of the people in your network. And they unfortunately, I've met with parents, and we've had them do presentations for us where their son or daughter killed themselves. And so, you know, I think a big part of it is to be able to enhance prevention and education. But once again, that's an area in law enforcement where that's a nice to do thing. You know, you're so busy dealing with the fires at your feet in terms of criminal investigations, you don't get to go out into the community as much as you should or need to. And, you know, funding could emphasize that area as well, that, you know, they need to do much more in terms of prevention and education. I think that's one of the more effective ways to harden a target so they're not victimized in the first place. But
yes, I certainly would agree with that, with hardening the targets. And you brought up a great point. It was kind of subtle in there, but you know, some parents, you know, they look at a cell phone and they'll put parental locks on there, but not necessarily go over to the computer or to the VR or whatever gaming system they're on. And so there may be gaps in there. And so for parents to actually lock down all of that to the best of their ability. I mean, even in newer iPhones on these iOS updates that we're getting, you know, you have to go into each individual app and create locks. Even on our phones, we're suggested to do that, so there isn't access. And I'm going to yield to the ranking member, and then I want to share a few stories from my district since we have a little bit of time here. But I want to thank you both so much for bringing in your expertise and bringing awareness to this, because our children are our nation's most valued assets, and that is where we need to invest and protect. They are our future, and really they are our now. If something is happening to them now, it's impacting our nation's future and, of course, their lives and so many families. So thank you for everything that you do, and I'll yield to the ranking member.
Thank you so very much. as you were talking, I was just curious about communities that are under-resourced, and they seem to be a hotbed or target for criminals. I know in Cuyahoga County, we just acquired some technology that's helpful to the prosecutor's office, but what do you suggest for those communities that are underserved and targeted by these criminals?
I would strongly encourage them to become affiliated with a task force, because some of this software, for example, to crack a cell phone is $100,000 a year subscription. And there's so many tools and technologies and they're constantly evolving. So you need a group of individuals who hopefully are federally funded at a sustained level to acquire that knowledge, get the tools and technology, and have the bandwidth to be able to have a smaller agency come to them and say, I need your help. And they will certainly do that. It's just the problem that they're so overwhelmed right now, it's very difficult. But every agency, as I said earlier, given their relative size, average size of 15 full-time sworn officers. I mean, if you have 50 or more sworn officers, you're in the top 11% of the country. When you hit 50 officers, now you may have people who specialize in this area, but when you think about 89% of the agencies don't have that level of resources, and these crimes are occurring in their jurisdiction every day. So that's why a national program is so important. And I can tell you too, local police academies are overwhelmed. I have a very close friend who's in charge of the New Hampshire Police Academy, but it's a nationwide problem. They're so busy just dealing with recruit academies and high liability, officer-involved shootings, those kinds of topics. They're unable in most states to bring in the type of training that these smaller agencies need. Once again, demonstrating the need for a national program so they're all trained in the same way to the same level, given the same tools. And this platform I showed you does so much more, right? There's a listserv where people, these smaller agencies are able to communicate with people that have been doing this for a lot longer, or maybe in a bigger agency. They're being given, model search warrants, policies and procedures, investigative guidelines, who to talk to at Meta or some other internet service provider if you need help. And the platform also supports, it's called a deconfliction system. So we don't investigate the same person without knowing it. So having these tools and technology really is a force multiplier for them. And so that's why it's so important to stand up these systems, give everybody in these smaller agencies access to them, but also support them through training, mental health services, support that whole ecosystem I was talking about earlier, so they have the resources to bring a child to a forensic interview at a child advocacy center, for example, if there isn't one for every community in the country, and there should be.
I think it's a really good question. And I think when you talk about under-resourced communities, I think there's two parts. I think I'll get to the child advocacy centers in a second, but let's just talk about the internet. Why are we forcing parents to have a part-time job, to spend half their day going through these various menus trying to figure out how to keep their kids safe when it should be safety by design, safety by default, right? And it's like, you look at like Cuyahoga County, I hope I pronounced that right. Oh my God, it's amazing. You look at Cleveland Clinic, right, and which has a lot of pediatric SANEs, right? You're talking about child advocacy centers. After a kid has been sexually abused, they'll often go to visit a sexual assault nurse examiner, right? But only certain of those SANEs can treat children. In Ohio, as an entire state, I think there's only around 50 pediatric SANEs. And the average age for someone receiving a SANE exam in Ohio is 15 years old. Yeah, so the systems that support after an incident are not complete. And there's a lot of things that we can do. We can use telesane systems and a bunch of things like that to extend those services with not that much effort, with not that much cost. But we haven't done that because we haven't really prioritized the second part of the system. Like, what we prioritized is the finding of images on Facebook, which is important. But we haven't thought about what happens to the victim after that. How do they get them removed? How do they get healed? What are the support systems, and how do we bring people to justice? We're not doing those parts. We're just doing the identification, and we think we're done, but we're not.
I really appreciate that response. Though that concludes the prepared questions that I have. I think this is a topic that we could probably talk about extensively for hours, perhaps even days, because it's so vast, so broad, and it's happening with such great frequency. I do have to slip out, but I want to thank you so much for coming today and the work that you're doing to combat child sexual abuse materials from being distributed online. I can't overstate how important it is that we continue to work together to protect children, especially as technology continues to advance and make things more accessible and not in a good way. So thank you for stepping in for the chairwoman, Representative Boebert, and I'm not sure where we go from here as it relates. I know my colleague, Mr. Walkinshaw I'm assuming he wanted to ask questions, so I hope he will be back in the very near future, but thank you so much.
Yeah, and we're happy to meet with any member individually as well, to go in more depth to a less public setting.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Member, and thank you for that offer to meet with members individually. We would love to continue these conversations. I have prepared some remarks just about some incidents that happened in my district as we prepare to close, and if other members join us, certainly they'll have the opportunity to ask you questions as well, but I'll give you both an opportunity after this to have some closing remarks for this hearing. In the digital age, crimes against children are not hypothetical. They are rampant, predatory, and escalating. In Weld County, law enforcement arrested a man distributing hundreds of images and videos of child sexual abuse after a cyber tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In Douglas County, in my district in Colorado, adults have used Snapchat to target what they believed were 14-year-old girls, sending explicit material and attempting in-person contact, exposing minors to grave physical and psychological danger. Roblox, as has been mentioned many times here today, one of the most popular online gaming platforms for children, has become a tool for predators to groom and exploit minors, including in Colorado. In Weld County, where I live, an adult used Roblox and Discord to manipulate a child over several weeks, persuading them to send explicit images resulting in felony charges for sexual exploitation. Similar cases have been reported across El Paso County in Colorado and the entire Front Range, where predators start conversations on Roblox, then has been discussed here in this hearing, move them to private messaging apps to isolate and manipulate children. In Castle Rock, minors have been stalked using Snapchat location features, which offenders attempting to confront children near their schools and other places. And in Greeley, schools have documented incidents where students create AI-generated nude images of classmates, spreading them online and in a disturbing new form of sexual exploitation enabled by technology. These cases are certainly not isolated. They are part of a disturbing, accelerating trend in our districts where technology is being weaponized to prey on the most vulnerable. Every day that passes without urgent intervention, more children are at risk for exploitation, sextortion, extortion, grooming, and trauma that can have lifelong consequences. Mr. Turkheimer, Mr. Russ, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and guidance here today, your insights on law enforcement prevention and victim support make it clear that protecting our children from digital exploitation requires urgent coordination and action. We are grateful to have you here today. We're happy to look at legislation. I have my team looking at the Senate bill for the GUARD Act and seeing why we don't have a companion bill here in the House to date, and see what we could do to coordinate and get legislation here to provide assistance. And I'll yield to Mr. Turkheimer for any closing remarks that you may have. And again, thank you so much for helping protect our children.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I really appreciate it. I just want to close by saying that safety is possible. It may seem impossible when you look at a map and there's like 10 people under investigation and 1,700 who are not. But we can actually get to a place where these kids are safe if we act quickly and in a comprehensive manner to make the internet safer, but also make them safer after an incident and make it safe for them to come forward. Kids can get support if they reach out and feel like they're going to be believed and supported, and that's hugely important. That's one of the things we do on the hotline, and 500,000 people, as I was mentioning, called it last year, and it's very important for children to believe that they can be safe, and they can, and we can give them that. So thank you so much for having this. I think it's such an important topic.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Russ?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very excited that this subcommittee is interested in this area. I've actually been on the Hill for well over 10 years talking about the importance of these issues. I'm hopeful that it can turn into a situation where there are additional resources for the task force program, because it is the most effective way. If you asked each state to try to do this on their own, or each law enforcement community to do this on their own, it'd be far less effective. So it's a wonderful program with truly dedicated, committed individuals that are just looking for the support from Congress to really do the job that they want to do and can do if they only had the capacity to do it. So thank you for your interest in this area.
Yes, wonderful. And I actually did think of one more question, and just considering legislation to help you all protect our children. Do you think that there is a component for AI to get involved to help search out these predators and maybe minimize that need for extra personnel and resources in some areas?
Yeah, one of the areas, I just came from the Florida ICAC Task Force Conference in December, and a lot of the task force commanders were talking about working together. I know the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is actively involved in this project to use AI to sift through the cyber tips that come from the National Center, because even though there's a lot of them, like 675,000 given to the task forces last year, it only takes, missing one of them could be one of the most horrific cases, in that it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So they're talking about AI solutions to try to sift through all of that material to find the most actionable cases and the ones that rise to the level of an imminent danger, which I think is a wonderful thing. But I'm told that the company that's working on this, they're talking about a subscription rate of $400,000 a year to have access to that tool. And that's something where the federal government could step in and say, okay, we are going to make this something that's far more cost-effective and support these task forces. Because, lives are at risk. When I showed those maps earlier, about what's just happened in the last week, and the fact that less than 1% of these offenders are under investigation, there needs to be a call to action where these investigators have the ability, not just the capability, but the ability to actually go after these worst offenders.
Yes.
And AI can help with that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and I think it's one of the places where I'm optimistic about what can happen. One of the things about these searches, and like when we were talking about cyber tips, and most of them coming from photo DNA, there's a real possibility to use the images that we have to help AI predict what is a image that is CSAM and what image is not, and to use that to sort of search out images going forward. So I think that there is a large possibility excuse me, for improving the searches and the identification. But we definitely need AI to sort of improve the efficiency of the system after that, right? And we already have a lot of this technology to determine whether or not something is a nude image on a phone or a sexual image on a phone, and really thinking about ways in which we can incentivize tech platforms to use that to make kids safer is huge, because the reality is we don't want to be dealing with this afterward, right? What we really want to have happen is these, like situations like sextortion. Sextortion looks the same over and over and over again. You can predict the way it looks. The conversations are the same. And AI can see that in real time and be able to stop those conversations, and stop that before the images are sent, before the sextortion occurs. There is a way that we can make the internet safer using AI. We just have to incentivize the people to do it.
I love it. Well, I stand ready to assist and work alongside you all, and I think I could speak for the other members on this subcommittee that they are as well. So I look forward to our future conversations on this topic. And at this time, this concludes our subcommittee hearing, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Testing, testing. You can't hear me, can you? Okay, I still hear me and myself in the room. Oddly. Hold on. Testing. Microphone, chairman's microphone. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closed captioning test for 2247. Oversight hearing at 2 p.m. All right. All right, thank you.